as I mentioned, are today located in Chamberlain, South Dakota. We're going to talk, as usual, a little bit about what happened 200 years ago along the trail, as well as what's happening today with the modern expedition being conducted by the Discovery Expedition as we make our way along the Missouri River from its mouth to its headwaters, stopping this year at Washburn, North Dakota. So thank you all for joining us, and as always, we look forward to those emails throughout today's program. We've got a great show lined up for you, and of course we'll be followed by a video conference afterwards today if you want to stay along and watch that. And the focus of that video conference today is buffalo, not only the role of the buffalo historically in the culture of Plains Indians, but also as well we're going to talk a little bit about the buffalo in contemporary context today as a food source and that sort of thing. So again, thank you for joining us. So let's start off right away. We're going to try and keep the time tight today. Let's start off right away by talking about what happened to the original Corps 200 years ago. The last time we talked with you a week ago was at a very strange time in the expedition. A lot of things were happening. York, this past week, shot his first buffalo. That was a very exciting and important moment in the expedition. Clark talks about taking York out hunting buffalo, and he sort of talks York through it. It was the first time for York to shoot a buffalo. Buffalo is an unusual animal, and we're going to learn more about that today in today's video conference. And so they sort of, based upon the journals, it seems that they sort of talk through it, where to shoot, that sort of thing, and he drops the buffalo. And that was an important thing. Again, York, a man who back in the East, a slave, is out here experiencing a lot of these adventures and sharing this voyage with the rest of the men of the expedition. Animals become particularly important this week. We are entering into an area where a lot, almost on a daily basis, of new animals, a lot of new animals on a daily basis are sort of cropping up. And remember, Lewis has identified 122 animals, 178 new plants for science, European science as it were, and he's starting to really identify a lot of plants and take new specimens here. He's taken, just this past week, of course they're still chasing down a prairie dog, and that's a big thing. They finally catch one of those things live, and they're very happy about that, to take back to President Jefferson. A jackrabbit, an antelope this week, a porcupine. They see new wolves they hadn't encountered before. They hunt grouse in the course of this week, prairie chickens. So the diversity of animal life is becoming terrific here, and Lewis, of course, is trying to do his best to collect those species and do anatomical drawings of them and that sort of thing, so that science, European science and the world of the East and Europe can become familiar with all of this diversity in terms of plants and animals here on the North American continent. So that's a big part of it. Not just animals, but remember that Lewis has been charged with identifying new plants and animals, but as well as mineralogy in terms of geological features, terrain features, and mineral content in the soil that they're passing by. This area, and you're going to see some of the footage of this, of what we've passed by in this past week or so, but this area is fundamentally different, and we've talked about how things have changed and all. And here there's a tremendous amount of exposed rock along the shoreline of the river. Even with the dams today, it's much the same as it was. And as Lewis and Clark passed by this area, they saw a tremendous amount of deposits of a variety of minerals along the way, multicolored. What they believed, some of them they believed to be volcanic in nature. And so this week they also took a side trip, as it were. Lewis took a group of people out into the interior, actually searching for those volcano fields. And we've talked about this before, that some of not just was this mission about finding out new information, but it was sort of about dispelling myths about long-held beliefs that were untrue. And one of those was that there were vast volcano fields out here. Of course, they also believed that there were woolly mammoths in this area, as well as the lost tribe of Welsh Indians. And of course, they didn't find any of the three of those things out here. It was an exciting week in that Shannon, who was lost, came back for the original expedition. Of course, our Shannon also, we're going to talk about that, came back, and there are some parallels between the two stories there. We're going to talk about Josh's ride, Josh Loftus. So it was an exciting week for the Corps 200 years ago, and it's been an exciting week for us as well. They passed the White River, and which we did just 2 days ago, which was a very important river for them to pass. It had a tremendous discharge of minerals and actually changed the color of the river as they passed by it. Same was true for us. The White River gets its name because of the high amount of sediment that it discharges, which discolors the Missouri River, and we passed by that this week as well. So A lot of exciting things, almost exclusively dealing with plants, animals, and geology. This was not, this past week, a terribly important week with regard to their interaction with the native tribes. They had left the area of the Yankton, had not quite entered into the area of the Lakota. So we're going to have that opportunity today to take a look at what the Discovery Expedition has encountered over its last week on the river. So we're going to roll that footage now. And you're going to see here, first of all, at Wetstone Bay. Now, this is just above Pickstown and the Fort Thompson, Fort Randall Dam. And we're meeting there with a large group of people. This is an interesting place. One of the things that also happened to these folks, to Lewis and Clark 200 years ago in this area, this is Joe Dooley with his ranch down there at the Mulehead Ranch area. A terrific place. This is near where they found the 45-foot fish, as they referred to it, and they've talked about the vertebrae being intact and all that sort of thing. And indeed, it was a plesiosaur or a mosasaurus, actually an amphibious dinosaur, and they found that. And here, what Joe's presenting us with actually is a set of teeth and some and a piece of vertebrae that were actually, I guess, collected because in the ensuing years, over the last 200 years, a lot of archaeological digs have taken place and that sort of thing, and they have actually found a number of these prehistoric animals there in the area. And here we are at Wetstone Bay, getting ready to leave, and it's September 11th. And as always, we are very aware of the contemporary world in which we live, and the Discovery Expedition is taking time to observe that fateful and historic day in our nation's history when so many lives were lost due to acts of terrorism in New York and Washington and Pennsylvania. So it was not lost on us, despite the fact that we were engaged in our activity. We did take time and continue to take time to reflect on those contemporary issues that face us all. And here we are taking a moment in silence to consider those things. And now you see the keelboat making its way up the river. The river here is very, very shallow, and we're moving very slowly. Indeed, we have run onto sandbars. We have had a real battle with the river. The river has shown us why it is such a feat to make our way up this river with such large boats. And here, this is Josh Loftus sitting on top of his horse there after his return when we found him down near Snake Creek after Shannon, of course, goes all the way up to Bull Creek and then returns down to Snake Creek. And here you see the boat making its way on up the river there. And you see the terrain is just so different than anything that you probably have seen us show you before. Here we are in South Dakota with the largely denuded hills and very little tree cover and that sort of thing, the high hills along the water. So that's what's been happening with the Discovery Expedition. We are currently in Chamberlain, South Dakota. As I mentioned before, we're probably about 20 miles or so below the Fort Thompson area, of the area of the Big Bend Dam, and just about to enter into the area that will be bridged on either side by the Lower Brule tribe and reservation, Lower Brule Reservation on the West River and the Crow Creek Reservation on the East River as we make our way up toward Pier over the next week or so. So a lot's going on, and one of the great things for us is our stop in Chamberlain. We've been here before. We were here 3 years ago and really enjoyed our stop here, not only with the community at large, but specifically the stop at the Octocona Museum at the St. Joseph Indian School. And we are very pleased to be joined right now by Dixie Thompson, who is, and please correct me if I always call you the executive director. Is that the correct title?
I'm the director of the museum.
Well, you'll always be the executive director in our heart, Dixie. And Dixie is the director of the museum, and as I mentioned at the outset of today's program, this is an outstanding facility. I remember coming in here 3 years ago, and I have been to all of the interpretive centers along the trail. I've been to so many museums and things along the way, but this particular facility is truly outstanding, not only with regard to the items that are on display here, but just the layout, the presentation, and everything, and even the gift shop here. And you know, sometimes I'm reluctant to talk about gift shops, but your gift shop has just some fabulous native jewelry and artwork, and the collection of books here is tremendous. And so we're pleased to be here, and thank you for having us, Dixie.
Thank you very much. I think we'll start today by actually telling you a little bit about Octocona Museum and how it connects with St. Joseph Indian School.
Great.
Just a short little tour on that.
Okay, well, why don't you do that? We'll
Okay.
go ahead as we're saying. Tell us a little bit about when the place was started and all of that.
Okay, St. Joseph Indian School was founded in 1927 by the Congregation of the Priests of the Sacred Heart. That's a worldwide Catholic organization whose members are made up of priests and brothers who've chosen a life of religious education. We're very fortunate to receive all of our funding comes to us through private donations. We do not receive any state, federal, or tribal funding. We have benefactors, a base of benefactors that actually support our school and the children that we serve. And I guess I might mention that the children we serve are Native American children from across the state. It's a residential school. Curriculum is 1st through 12th grade. 8th grade on campus, our 9th through 12th graders attend the public school. So, and actually a museum is part of our students' curriculum. That's why we're located here on the campus.
But before we go on with the footage, it's interesting you talked about the benefactors and that sort of thing. You know, as this project was getting underway, and this is something we'll share with our audience because the audience joins us each week and they kind of have gotten to know all of us a little bit. Okay. But one of the interesting ironies or you know, coincidences or whatever it might be considered is we were putting this project together, and Jim Sturm, who's our technical director, who's behind the scenes running all these things, as we started talking about this, it ended up Jim had been a long-time contributor to the school here.
Yeah, actually, we have benefactors that are located across the nation, so we're very fortunate. People are very generous to donate to a worthy cause. We've been in existence for 77 years now. So.
Well, why don't we, just to get this out of the way right away, I know it's on our website, but it's
www.stjo.org.
stjo.org. So, and people can find out all about the school and all about the museum there as well.
They can.
Great. So let's go ahead and now take a look at some of this footage about the museum.
Okay. As you enter the museum, you'll enter the section of what we call Camp Circle, and that's actually the section of our museum that details Indian life on the plains prior to contact with the Euro-American people. The diorama that you're seeing here was painted by Tom Phillips, a Chickasaw Indian from Oklahoma, and it gives you a great span of about a 250-mile stretch from the Black Hills to the Missouri River. The section here that we're moving into is actually our teepee section. The type of items that they used prior to the Euro-American people were very primitive: rock, stone, everything they used came from the earth. The clothing that you see on the family here is that of a very ceremonial style clothing. They wouldn't have worn that in their everyday life. The small teepee in this display is what we call a traveling teepee. It's made of 4 to 6 buffalo hides. A normal teepee would be made of anywhere from 12 to 18, if not more. This is an example of the traditional style of tools and utensils used. Buffalo bone was used to make hoes. Everything prior to the 1800s that the Indian people used came from the earth. The buffalo provided everything they needed. The arrowheads were actually chipped from stone. The parfleche containers that you see there were actually made from, parfleche means rawhide. They were made from the buffalo hide. They were cut, dried, and then assembled into boxes, envelopes. That was their type of luggage or cabinet space. They put all of their personal possessions in those types of parfleche containers.
Great. Now, I did have a question about the on the mural.
Yes.
We talked about contact prior to Euro-American contact, but there are horses there.
Well, it is believed that there were horses in this area prior to the Spaniards bringing them over.
Really?
Some type of horse, yes.
Okay, very good. Well, that's an important thing for us to understand because and those are great things for us to learn about as well. So. We have this wonderful display here. What was the when you put together the museum, and what was sort of your guiding driving force there? Actually,
when we put the museum together, we wanted to make it more educational for our students. A lot of our students come to us, or most of our students come to us from the most economically impoverished areas across the state, and not all of them know their culture and heritage as well as people believe they do. So we decided to put our displays together so that they could actually progress through history and see the traditional types of items used by their ancestors if they hadn't learned that in their home. Just continuing education for them and also the public schools and surrounding community as well.
Okay, so when I'm a visitor to the Octocona Museum, I come in and I've seen the traditional life pre-Euro-American contact. How does and what's interesting for our audience as well, which I don't know if is clearly communicated from the footage here, but the building is circular, yes, which is an important thing architecturally, but it's also it flows very nicely when someone walks in. So I think, and we've got some footage coming up, but after we've seen the pre-contact mural area there, we go into another space.
You do. Actually, we have what we call a museum-sized medicine wheel, which hangs in the museum. And that represents the 4 cardinal colors and the 4 sacred directions of the Native American people. It's divided into actually 4 sections. The section that we just viewed was what we call our section to the west, our yellow section, our Camp Circle section. As I mentioned, items in there of all traditional items. It details items that were used prior to Euro-American contact. As we move to the southern section, or our south red section, that's our Two Worlds Meet section. And in that section of the museum, the material items will change dramatically. This is a section of the museum where Lewis and Clark, they did meet Lewis and Clark in this area. You'll see that their material items changed from the primitive rock, bone, to the more material items of the brass containers. Their clothing went from the hide clothing to the trade cloth clothing. Their attire began to change. It was items that they could trade with from the settlers and the traders that came in this area. Their weapons changed from the traditional bow and arrow to guns. They traded for guns. Hide bowls changed from hide bowls and wooden bowls into brass buckets, metal cups, tin cups, items of that sort.
Taking advantage of the trade.
Correct.
Okay. You know, let's stop for just a moment and talk about, you mentioned Lewis and Clark and their contact with Lewis and Clark, and we just took a look at the traditional area there. When we talk about the Sioux nations that Lewis and Clark encountered here in this area, what was the homeland? Where were the Sioux? And obviously now the reservations really are just a fraction of the land that they would have called home.
Actually, they were very nomadic people, so they covered most of the western part of the United States, as far down as Oklahoma, and as far north as the Canadian lands. And then they kind of followed the buffalo. They were nomadic, so where the buffalo went, the people followed. Okay. Because the buffalo was the mainstay. Everything they needed to survive was the buffalo, so they followed the herds.
You talked about life changing when traders came in, European influence, and all these trade goods became available. But specifically, as far as the contact with Lewis and Clark, what immediate impact, based upon oral traditions and histories and things like that, from the perspective of the Native American community, what impact did that have immediately?
Immediately, I'm not sure if I don't know if there was a drastic change immediately, but the expedition was an onset for settlers, more traders, missionaries coming to this area. At one time, I think it was like 60 million buffalo roamed this area, and 80 years after the Lewis and Clark expedition, there were only a few thousand left in the area. And the Native people actually utilized every part of the buffalo. They wasted nothing. They were very spiritual people, and a lot of the traders that came in and hunters just shot the buffalo for its hide, left the remains to rot in the sun. So it did dwindle the tribes drastically in less than 80 years span. So.
Okay, and I think we're going to look at continue to look at some of this footage that deals with the contact and how this cultures came together or didn't come together.
Actually, yes. This section of our museum is what we call our Broken Promises section. The wagon you see represents that, similar to what was issued to Native American people with the Fort Laramie Treaty. They were asked to leave their homelands and were pushed onto reservations by the government. So we actually we're taking away everything that the people knew.
Jim, could you stop there for just a moment on the footage? I want to go back for just a minute. We saw that wagon there, and part of that wagon, as I understand it, was, and you mentioned given to the families. It was given to the families provided that they agreed to a series of situations. For example, to accept farming as a way of life and some things like that, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, actually, they didn't even have to be willing to accept it. I mean, each family was allotted 160 acres of land. They were given a wagon, dried beef, flour, seed, so that they, utensils, so they could become farmers rather than the nomadic hunters that they were. And that actually was one of the stipulations with the Fort Laramie Treaty.
Okay. And if we can go back to that next piece of footage that we were just on there, Jim, maybe just a little bit earlier, because I think this is an important thing to see these items that you have, and maybe you can describe these items for us, because we see so much as we travel across the country and spend time in Native American communities. We see so oftentimes how they have embraced the American flag and things like that in artwork, and these are a terribly, not only a warring culture or a warrior culture, but a very fiercely proud and patriotic people.
Yes, they are. They're very spiritual. They're very patriotic. The BIA was formed after and that's the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The police department was formed after the Native people were forced onto the reservations. Once the people got onto the reservations, though, they didn't know how to farm. They weren't able to provide for themselves because they didn't have the skills they needed to provide for themselves. And if you'll just scan to that photo in the display, this is an excellent photo. Once the people were pushed onto the reservations, they relied totally on the U.S. government to provide what they needed because they were unable to make a living off the lands they were pushed onto. And this picture, details that. The people are lining up, for food just so that they can feed their families because the buffalo are now gone. Their traditional way of life is now gone. Everything they've known, we, the government, had taken that away from them.
Absolutely. And we did pass over those items there, the flag and that beautiful vest, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about those particular items.
The vest is actually a contemporary piece. That's a traditional art. That would be a form of the contemporary art that's done now. They've taken, the European style of clothing and they've beaded it from the items that they traded with from the Europeans. Actually, most of the clothing was very simple. Prior to Europe-American contact, it wasn't decorated with basically elk teeth, bone beads, porcupine quill work. They actually traded for the beadwork once they met the Euro-American people. So that's a type of style that was introduced after the reservation era. So.
Okay. And I think we have another piece of footage here that we're going to take a look at. But let's actually go ahead and let's take a look at that comment right there. This is a quote from Red Cloud.
This is a quote from Red Cloud, and it definitely explains how the people felt. After all the promises the U.S. government had made with the Indian people, Red Cloud states, "They made us many promises, more than I can remember, but they never kept one. They never kept but one. They promised to take our land, and they took it." And that's a quote from Red Cloud from 1870, after they were pushed onto the reservations.
Okay, very good. And that's really important, and this is something we're going to be talking about a great deal over the next couple of weeks, actually, or not just treaties in general, and some, because certainly there's more than one treaty that there were issues with.
Exactly, there certainly was. Most every treaty that was made with the Indian people was broken by the U.S. government, so the trust factor there is gone.
Right, and here I think we see Sitting Bull here in this.
Sitting Bull. This is a picture of Sitting Bull. This would have been in the probably the 1870s as well, after he was pushed onto the reservations. A great leader, influential in the Battle of Little Bighorn.
Okay, very good. Well, we certainly have appreciated the opportunity to look at those sections, but the museum has it continues to have there's much more to the museum. I think we've got some footage here of some artwork as well, because one of the things that I think is striking, you mentioned the vest, but when the first time I came here, I was just really amazed by some of the beautiful items that are on display here, which from a cultural perspective, just as art, I mean, despite the ceremonial significance and everything else, just the craftsmanship and the artistry in many of these pieces, and we're going to have a chance now, I think, to look at some contemporary pieces.
Okay. The items in this section of our museum, which we call Continuity and Change, actually we display items of contemporary form of art. This is a sculpture made from alabaster by one of our artists. Many of the artists that have items on display here are former students from St. Joseph Indian School. This is a bronze piece by Alfred Ziegler. He was one of the earlier students here. It simply explains how spiritual the people were. That warrior has actually made a kill. He shot a buffalo, and now he's thanking the Great Spirit for providing him with a safe hunt. They've been, over the past 200 years, everything that's actually happened to the Indian people, they've been able to hold on to their culture. They're a very proud culture. They're a very strong nation. And the items in this section just kind of depict what the significance is of their culture.
And we saw there the one piece the earlier, just prior to this one, that incorporated both native symbols as well as those of the church.
That it was not uncommon. Once they had, Christianity and their traditional spiritual culture kind of intermixed. Some of the beliefs you can see a dialogue between them. There's definitely a parallel between their beliefs and Christian beliefs. And we end with the picture. This is by Bobby Pan, and it's entitled The Altar, and it gives you just a span from the early 1800s to modern day. It's a powerful piece.
And we continue to see the buffalo figuring prominently into even cultural representations like this today.
Always, yes. The buffalo has always played a very prominent role in Native American life, and it still does today.
Thank you, first of all, Dixie, for
Thank you.
for giving us that virtual tour of the museum. And while this was terrific, and we're so happy to have it, I just can't express enough how important it is if you have the opportunity to actually visit this museum and spend some time here and to take it all in, because despite the fact that we're pleased to be able to bring it to you virtually in this way, it is far from comprehensive what we've been able to show you. So please put Chamberlain on your triptych and stop by here and make this a destination as you travel along the trail or anywhere across the country. In fact, that's an important thing. We're just off of 90. Tell us, actually, for someone who's traveling the country, how would they get here?
We're just off of Interstate 90 at exit 263 in Chamberlain, South Dakota.
It's not that big of a place. They ought they ought to be able to find it.
Community of about 2,500 people.
Great. Well, now we did get some emails while we were speaking there, and one of them was, just for clarification from some of our audience members, was who exactly was Red Cloud?
Red Cloud was one of the Ogallala warriors. I don't have a lot of...
I think he was the last one to sign the Fort Laramie Treaty, wasn't he?
Yeah, he might be.
I think he was. To my understanding, Red Cloud was certainly a prominent man within the tribe, and I believe he was the last one after the Fort Laramie Treaty had been signed. He was the last one to actually come in and surrender and lay down his arms. I believe so.
I believe so.
Okay, well, we'll check on that, and we'll definitely try to make sure that we're clear on that. And also, one of the other questions was about here at St. Joseph Indian School, and obviously we see a lot reflected in the artwork we saw there, and that's presented here in the museum. But within the school itself, and this is a Catholic-based school, is that correct?
The school is owned and operated by the Priest of the Sacred Heart, which is Catholic-based, but our students aren't necessarily Catholic.
Okay.
We accept children of any denomination.
Well, one of the questions that was asked was, are traditional traditional spiritualism, traditional healing, or any of the traditional Native American church practices taught here or allowed here, or is that part of the culture here?
Yes, they are definitely allowed. We have a Lakota Studies class, and we also have we teach the children their ceremonies if they'd like to participate in that. It's up to the students whether or not they want to participate, but it is available to them to take part in those types of ceremonies.
There's a great book for those of you who might be interested in reading more about that. The Pipe in Christ, I believe it's called, and I've read it several years ago, and it actually talks about the relationship between that the church has had with Sioux traditional religious practices.
That's correct. That book was written by Father William Stoltzman, and he actually lived on the Pine Ridge Reservation for, I think, 6 years and interacted with the people, and he did actually it's a parallel of the two religious customs, and I think he's done a good job in representing that.
Right, it'd be a great one for someone to take a look at. I'm trying to think, now did someone hand you an email there?
No.
Oh, okay, all right, I thought maybe you had one as well, because they've been handing us some emails. Again, I'd remind folks, if you have an opportunity to send us an email, send it to Lewis N. Clark, all spelled out, Lewis N. Clark, at clayton.k12.mo.us. And we are very fortunate today to be joined by a live audience, a small one, but we'd like to extend an opportunity to any of our audience members if they have a question. Does anyone have a question? Anyone who's joined us today about anything that you've seen here today, or any question you'd like to ask Dixie? Well, it looks like we don't have any questions at this time. Dixie, tell us a little bit about, if you would, about we've seen items that were shot the other day by Jim when he was preparing the B-roll for today's broadcast. But since we don't have an opportunity to bring our audience here today, there are some items here that we won't be able to show them to them, but what are some of the items here in the museum that are just of particular importance? And what I'd like to do is start with bringing one to the forefront, and maybe Jim can even find that back in the video. One of them were the blue trade beads that we saw earlier. There are some things here in this museum that are not only valuable and all, but they're unique and terribly important as well. And some of those, which I guess are rather, in the whole scheme of things, they seem rather mundane compared to some of these beautiful pieces of art, but those are very important.
Well, one of our most often asked questions is, where did the Indian people get the beads from? And they were actually one of the main trade items early on. And the skein of beads that you'll see is an actual scan of beads that was traded with from a trading post, very similar to the one that was shown in the clippage. But that's exactly how they were wrapped and traded with the Indian people. Very tiny glass Czechoslovakian seed bead is what they were, and that was a big trade item.
Now, and what's really exciting about this particular piece that we're looking at today is this is an actual bundle. Am I correct?
That's correct. That's the actual bundle. So it probably dates back to the early 1800s, very early 1800s.
And of course, from Lewis and Clark's perspective, the one thing that when the trip was over, one of the items, in fact, the top of the list, what was the item that you should have taken more of? It was blue beads. And so obviously they continue to be important, and here we see them. And so what's represented by this bundle here is actually of tremendous value within the context of trade with Native Americans.
Definitely, that's correct, as well as other items, but that one was very important as well.
And talking about trade with Native Americans, one of the things that I think is important that we talk about is when Lewis and Clark came by this very place in 1804, this was not first contact with Euro-Americans for these people. There had been European traders in this area for quite some time. So we're talking about a people who had already been engaged in international trade for probably well over 100 years.
That's true. That's exactly true. There were many traders that came up the river prior to Lewis and Clark, and that could be why there was some misinterpretation when Lewis and Clark came up the river, because the Indian people were expecting traders, not an exploration group.
Right, and that certainly did play into a lot of the confusion about why there weren't more trade goods and things involved with that, as well as just communication, just a breakdown of communication. Is there anything else that besides some of the things that we showed you? I mean, I'm looking right over here to our right, and I don't know if we can maybe get somebody on one of the other cameras, but we've got a display that's just to the left of us, and there's our parfleche box that we saw earlier and some of those things. But there's just some terrific items here. And one of the one I wanted to ask about was
what you're seeing on the table right now, these are all items that are made from different parts of the buffalo. You'll notice the bowl, that's a hide bowl. It was actually made from the hide of the buffalo. That was a traditional style used prior to Euro-American contact.
And it's just hard hide.
It's just a hide that, they boiled the fur off of it, dried it, and it's very useful. What you see in the bowl, it's called timsilia. Those are wild turnips. That was an important vegetable or product, actually a starch product for the Native American people. You'll see the buffalo horns there, the caps. Those were used for cups. They actually drank out of those. As you kind of pan through that, some other items on there are the bladder bag. Actually, the bladder of the buffalo was actually used for carrying their water. They didn't have buckets at that time, so they had to have some type of item to help them carry their water. And you'll see the buffalo horn spoons on the table there. Buffalo bone brushes, which were made from the hump of the buffalo. Everything the Lakota people used came from the buffalo. They relied solely on that buffalo for their way of life.
Absolutely, and we've talked about that a great deal in the past, about, people hear that. They hear people say, they used every part of the animal, they used every part of the buffalo. But this was, literally every part of the buffalo, the sinew from the tendons, and we oftentimes have said that the really Native Americans were the ultimate recyclers.
They really were. The hoofs were boiled down and used for glue. As you mentioned, sinew was made from the tendons of the buffalo, which they actually sewed their garments together with, their hide garments together with. The ropes were braided from the fur of the buffalo, which are very strong. Hide scrapers were made from the bones. Hose were made from the hip bones of the buffalo. Every part of that buffalo was used.
Well, this is great. It really helps to inform the video conference we're going to have a little bit later today when we talk about the buffalo and to understand how important it was within the culture. In fact, and I think, again, it's important to understand not only how, maybe it's not even fair to say how important it was, but how paramount it was to the culture. Everything stemmed from the buffalo, including religious practice to some degree in terms of creation myths and everything.
Correct. That is correct. As you mentioned, every part of it was used. It was very influential in their way of life.
Now, before we have to get out of here today, I'd like to bring it back to the museum for just a moment. And that is, besides just being a wonderful facility, augmenting the St. Joseph's curriculum and all of that sort of thing, what are some of the other outreaches, educational outreach and things that the Octocona Museum is involved with? I noticed the other day when we stopped by, you had an elder hostel here with folks traveling the Lewis and Clark Trail.
We do. Actually, from May through October is what we call our tour season. That is the point of time when most of the people that are visiting the museum are tourists. That's our tour season. So we get anywhere from 25 to 30,000 people in during that period of time. And then, starting after the school year in August through spring, which is the 1st of May, most of our visitors are school field trips. So we work with the local and community schools on classroom visits here to the museum.
Well, it's great, and I want to thank you so much. Dixie, and I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a couple of years, and it has been a pleasure. You've been a friend to not only the Discovery Expedition, but I'd certainly like to count you as a friend, and I appreciate all that you have done. To let you all know, just this past week, we had to have some things sent to us, and we imposed upon Dixie and sent some things here to the Octocona Museum, and she's been a great help to the Discovery Expedition. And we look forward to the time we're going to spend here in the future. We're going to be signing off from this broadcast in just a few moments and then getting ready for the video conference today. Our two-way video conference, we'll be working with students. We encourage our online audience to continue to stay with us. It'll be just a little while before we're back on, and you can maybe grab yourself some lunch or something and come back and join us for that broadcast. We're going to be talking with Dave Hansen today from the Triple U Buffalo Ranch, as well as a gentleman from here at the St. Joseph Indian School, talking about the buffalo, both as in a historical context as well as contemporary, and there'll be opportunities for you to email us questions throughout that broadcast as well, and as well as to learn from the students that are going to be joining us who have things to share today as well. So once again, we thank you for joining us for this morning's broadcast of Live with Lewis, and until we see you next time, we proceeded on.